Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021, a 5-month mission I've embarked on with a bunch of other BookTubers where we're reading Star Trek for the rest of 2021, franchise by franchise. So we started with the original series, which included the animated show and also the movies. Then we moved on to The Next Generation. That was a lot of fun. And now we're reading Deep Space Nine, which is the story of an odd Star Trek incarnation that doesn't center on the adventures of a ship. Instead, it's, as the title implies, a space station, orbiting the planet Bajor, and very near to a gigantic, stable wormhole leading directly to the Gamma Quadrant of the galaxy. So tens of thousands of light years that can be traversed in an instant. When we first get to Deep Space Nine, it's under the command of Benjamin Sisko. He has partial Starfleet crew, and there are a whole bunch of Bajoran nationals who help to run the security on the station. There's a promenade where there's commerce and whatnot. And we're given the impression that there's sort of sporadic trading that goes on through the wormhole in both directions. For the first few seasons of the show, that's all that's talked about. But science fiction fans who watched that premise immediately thought, well, okay, what if something invaded through the wormhole to conquer the Alpha Quadrant? And after a while, after a few seasons, that's exactly what the showrunners had happen. A gigantic conquest civilization called the Dominion comes through the wormhole to conquer the Alpha Quadrant. The Dominion is ruled by founders who are served by a servant class of alien called the Vorta. And the Vorta worship the founders as gods, because the founders are not solids. They are shape-shifting liquid creatures who can take on any form, any substance, and who years before seeded the Alpha Quadrant with members of their own kind who had very little in the way of memory of where they came from. One of those is the founder who is the head of security on Deep Space Nine, Odo. And the founders and the Jem'Hadar, the founders and the Vorta employ the Jem'Hadar, a race of warrior beings that they create. They are genetically created. They only live for a few years. They're entirely addicted to a substance that only the founders can provide them. They're intentionally addicted. So they are disposable, extremely formidable warriors. And the Dominion comes into the Alpha Quadrant making all sorts of fascistic demands and wins over the alliance of other races in the Alpha Quadrant. The Breen, the Cardassians, the Romulans agree to neutrality. Eventually, it's war. And the Federation and the Klingon Empire, who are allies, it's a little bit rocky. The story of the alliance is a little bit rocky. But eventually they are allies in their fight against the Dominion. And sooner or later, if you're an old-time Star Trek fan, you're watching the show as the show suddenly becomes about the war. Suddenly, it's usually not anymore quandary by quandary episode. Instead, it's one huge multi-episode tapestry of an interstellar war, of the Federation at war, something we have never seen before. We'd never seen it before this show. And the writers leaned into it. Bless them, they did. They took just the right approach. The wormhole is the entry point for the Dominion to enter the Alpha Quadrant. So Deep Space Nine is suddenly not only on the front lines, but the most pivotal piece of real estate anywhere in the Federation. And that's great. It brought the series to life. Absolutely to life. And suddenly the show was, in fact, about something. Right? In the earlier two incarnations of the show, the main thing was that the scene of operations was the flagship of the Federation, the great Starship Enterprise. And the Starship Enterprise brings its own significance with it, wherever it goes. So you don't have to ask what's significant or why is this significant. The fact that the Enterprise is involved makes it significant. Whereas a show set on a space station, if it was Space Station K7, it would be bureaucratic comings and goings all season long. I don't think that would be very interesting. For the occasional appearance of tribbles notwithstanding, it would. You need a reason to make real estate interesting, and the showrunners finally came up with that reason. The Great Dominion War, in which the Federation, the Klingons, eventually the Romulans, eventually the Cardassians as well, all have to band together to fight the Dominion, or they'll be picked off one at a time. some fantastic special effects sequences in Deep Space Nine, sequences that hold up to this day. Some fantastic personal moments. The writing really did rise to the occasion. And when I was mentioning in an earlier Deep Space Nine episode that the show needed something like that to bring it to life, and that the books can't really be episodic things, several of you reminded me that there was a 4-part collection of novels about the Dominion War. And that was, I remembered those. I read those when they first came out, but I hadn't read them in decades and decades. And it was encouraging for me to hear, because my reading of Deep Space Nine fiction has been the curse of Terok Nor. It has been cursed. These Deep Space Nine novels that I have been reading have been terrible. The ones that weren't totally dependent on me reading a dozen previous books were poorly written, or both. So the other night I was thinking, I don't want to consign myself to reading bad science fiction every single night. Maybe this calls for extreme measures. And the extreme measure that I decided on was to break one of my rules for BookTrek. I originally started out saying that I'm not just going to use this as an occasion to revisit all of my favorite Star Trek books, all of my favorite Star Trek authors. I did not do a video about The Price of the Phoenix. I did not do a video about The Fate of the Phoenix. Vin did a video about Triangle, but I did not. I did not do anything like that. I have not gone back to my favorite authors. But I'm making an exception just this once to try and throw off the curse of Terok Nor. So I am returning for Deep Space Nine today to my favorite Star Trek author, Diane Carey, who's written for every one of the Star Trek. I was going to say every one of the Star Trek incarnations that we're talking about in BookTrek 2021, but I'm not off the top of my head sure she's ever written Star Trek Enterprise. But she has written Deep Space Nine, and she wrote one of the novels in the books that adapted the screenplays to make the story of the Dominion War. That's the Dominion War Book 2. That had these original ones had these sort of brushed, roughened portraits on the inside of different people. And this is adapted from 8 different scripts, which you would think would make it very ungainly and jarring, discordant, and also rote. That if you know the episodes, you will know what's in the book. But Diane Carey's too good for that. And she does a lot of the things that I'm faulting Deep Space Nine writers for not doing. She brings her characters alive. She makes their dialogue interesting instead of computer generated. She imbues everything with drama, even when you've already seen it on the little screen. And she fleshes out the little moments that had to have happened to make sense between the episodes we watch. And that's just wonderful to watch. There's a fantastic scene in here where Gul Dukat, the Cardassian, at the moment he is in charge of Deep Space Nine. He has renamed it Terok Nor. He has expelled the Federation. And there's a moment here, he was also the overseer of the Cardassian occupation of the planet Bajor, that enslaved its people, stripped its natural resources. It was a brutal, long occupation. And there's a 2-page segment in here where Gul Dukat is explaining him how I didn't want to be a tyrant. The Bajorans made me be a tyrant. And it is fantastic. You almost find yourself agreeing until you realize it's the justification of every boot-heel fascist in the history of the world. And it's just wonderful. Just wonderful. You see something like that and you want to see it acted by the actor who played Gul Dukat. And I want to read you a scene from this that is another example of that. This is Benjamin Sisko, who is in charge of Deep Space Nine, or was. Now he's on the Defiant, but because he doesn't have his station anymore, temporarily. And the Klingon General Martok, who is a very, very interesting character in Deep Space Nine. A fantastic portrayal in multiple parts of a character. The actor J.G. Hertzler plays Martok as an enormous, hulking, one-eyed Klingon general who is purely Klingon. He's not like Worf. He was not raised by humans. He does not want to be human, or he is not compelled by his human upbringing to try to be extra Klingon. Instead, he's fully Klingon. They are wonderfully different, complementary characters. It's a great job that Hertzler does as Martok. And in this scene, he and Benjamin Sisko are talking about the 7th Fleet, the Starfleet 7th Fleet, which was just cut to ribbons off stage. We see that in one of these episodes. We hear that the Seventh Fleet was cut to ribbons, that barely any ships survived out of the whole wing that was attacked by the Dominion. And Sisko is furious about this. And he has a conversation with Martok that I want to read to you. Because it's just... it's just so well done. Let's see here. Feeling his knees crack, Sisko grasped the edge of the table and lowered himself into a seat. When Martok arrived with his fresh, steaming mug, there was almost a human being sitting there. They knew, Sisko rumbled. Somehow they knew the fleet was coming and ambushed it. Of course they knew, Martok said. The Dominion is run by the Founders. The Founders are shapeshifters. This table or my boot could be a disguised Founder. Your mug, that door. They could have spies everywhere. How can we keep a secret? How can the Federation and the Klingon Empire keep to ourselves information about the movements of entire battle wings? What can we do about it? Our enemy can disguise themselves as my hair if they want to. We have to stop it. Sisko's fingernails dug into his palms. What's going on at the Admiralty? How can they possibly lose 100 ships without retreating before it reaches that point? They were ambushed, Captain. Even a retreat is smarter than that. What kind of orders are the captains being given by their flag admirals? Who lets things get to the point where 100 captains and 100 officer staffs and 100 ships and all that hardware is utterly lost? He sat and fumed and steamed and stared. In the middle of the fume, a thread snapped. They know something, he blurted, almost without thinking. The Klingon tilted his head in question. What? Shifting a couple of times, Sisko rolled his thoughts from side to side, then pressed a hand to the broken tabletop without even paying attention to the cut it gave him. Their victory was too overwhelming, Martok, he said. Nobody can have a victory like that without knowing ahead of time what's about to happen. No one can take on a combined fleet and leave only 14 ships. It's just too lucky. It's too lucky. To me, that's a giveaway. In fact, it's downright foolish to use whatever information they had so brazenly. They've given away that they knew more than they should know. Clutching any possibility, he stared through his fog of anger at the one little light. Leaning forward, one elbow pressed on the table, he leered at the closed and locked door panel. And I don't believe the Federation is littered with Founders. There might be a few here and there disguised as side tables, but we've been careful too. We've had all sorts of countermeasures, cooperative cells, isolation of factions, false information. We've taken every precaution any sensible military body could be expected to take. And with false information, you'd think we'd have at least been able to track down a couple of spies, but we haven't fleshed out so much as one. It doesn't make sense, said Martok. You're right. As soon as false information is acted upon, we know where the mole is, but not a boot or a plate has come to life. Sisko shook his head, fuming under every skin cell. Because the Founders know what they can do, they think we expect them to do it. So they're either not doing it or doing much less of it than we imagine. We waste our time hunting boogeymen, and they exact win after win on a bigger scale. If I were the Founders, I'd be delighted with the Federation and the Klingons being preoccupied with their ability to turn into a damn table lamp or chair or carpeting. They know their talent would drive us nuts. They know half of the population here is running around poking at inanimate objects and putting hot elements on tables and against walls and picture frames because they dare speak to each other. A moment of tense silence settled between them, uneasy and filled with the clacking of desperate thoughts. But Sisko couldn't help feeling as if a vault inside his head had been cracked and was leaking. We've been at peace too long, he uttered. We keep on trying to defend ourselves into victory. Defend? Martok's one eye narrowed. The fleet was on the attack when they were ambushed and slaughtered. How can you say It was still a defensive mentality, Sisko insisted. The Dominion attacked, then the combined fleet attacked back. I don't care how much of a front we put up. That's still defensive. It's not tricky enough. We have to come up with a plan to just outsmart the bullies time after time until we can become strong enough to push them out of our quadrant with a decisive win. That's going to take a long-range set of ideas and the guts to implement those ideas, and some way to contain the information so any spies are confounded. We can't be just a big committee and win this war. We have to get tricky, Martok. We have to start pressing our advantages. I see few advantages, Martok said. The Dominion has been doing this for a long time. They have the Jemadar, soldiers whom they manufacture, with short lifespans and nothing to live for but battle, so they might as well die battling. They are as expendable to the Dominion as the ends of our fingernails are to us. They're all programmed with the same information and the same personality. The Dominion can always make more. Sisko held up a finger. Those might be advantages. General, if we use them properly, the Jem'Hadar are manufactured and have the same mentality, the same knowledge, virtually no experience, and no individuality. They're not clever. We should use cleverness against them. They're not experienced. We should use experience against them. They're programmed. We use the advantage of individuality, spontaneity, and unpredictability against them. We haven't really been doing that. We've been fighting them based on them. We should be fighting them based on us. Martok sat back and contemplated Sisko. The scouring look was clear. Sisko was being surveyed as either a desperate maniac or a distraught mid-rank officer who'd snapped onto a whole new level of ruthless creativity. Probably he wasn't very wrong on that. At first, Sisko resented the glare, but after a minute realized he probably had snapped, and that was probably good. He rolled the hot mug between his flattened palms and stared into the Raktajino. For a few minutes there was silence as Martok let him simmer. Then Sisko found his voice again and started talking. I have to get more control at Starfleet somehow, he said. I have to get into the Admiral's offices, get involved somehow with the strategic decisions. You're going to maneuver for a promotion? Martok pushed. I would never take a promotion that would put me in an office with no ship under me. I thought you would never take the same thing either. Sisko drilled him sharply. No, General. I don't want any promotion. Not a permanent one, anyway. Just something, some connection, something to wheedle me closer to decisions. Give me some influence. Strategies coming out of the Admiralty might have to be more creative, or we're just looking at more disasters. The admirals who we have now, they haven't fought this kind of war. I've been out in deep space, defending the station, defending a planet, protecting a sector. You can't just go by the book on tactics. You don't understand. We have to be more creative. You have to change your thinking every single day because that's what your enemy does. I've got to get close and start changing things. And then it just goes on and on and on with characters, little interstitial scenes like that just bring all of the stuff you've seen on the screen alive. And it's gripping. And it's well done. And I wish that more Deep Space Nine novels were like it. I broke my rule. I went to Diane Carey. I knew she wouldn't disappoint me. And she didn't. This book was terrific. I'm not going to read any of the other Dominion War books because I don't want to risk reigniting the curse of Terok Noir. So I'm not going to pick another author that I know for tonight. But I'm going to go into it with more hope that maybe I can escape this curse. I'm going to try anyway. But for once, anyway, my BookTrek reading was not a disaster. This book was really good. So I'm going to wrap it up on that high note, a rare thing for BookTrek 2021. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.